BIP of Bizarre Interest Productions, and it's time to talk about something I've promised for a while but haven't delivered yet. So let's fix that, shall we? So let's talk. Who do you think is stronger? The Golden Boy, High School Prodigious Lone Wolf, and Monster, Free De La Hoya, or the White Dragon Knight, the White Tyrant, the Frozen Ogre, or the Absolute Champ, Louis Shirasage? For each of these topics, we're going to go down one season at a time to figure out which one would be the winners of each season, especially if these two were to go all out. Type who do you think will win in the comment section below, and let's get started. Obviously, let's start with Season 1, and it's no contest. While we don't know if there was a pre-evolution to Drain Fafnir in-universe, the fact that midway through Season 2/God we learned that Free was the number 1 blader in the world and Louis was number 2 says a lot. According to Go, or Gabe if you're watching the English dub, Louis came from overseas, and while we don't know necessarily what happened to him, we could imply that some of the battles he had to go through shaped and hardened the person that he is by when we were introduced to him during Season 1. There's also the fact that in Season 1, if Louis were to fight Free, the way he was at the start of Season 2, Louis probably wins, well, never. He'd probably lose most times. Drain Fafnir has been able to go toe-to-toe with Chrysaton easily, which defeated and broke Victory Valkyrie, who also defeated God Valkyrie at one point, who's got a similar game plan to Victory Valkyrie, the same Beyblade that Vault almost beat Louis with towards the end of the series. Season 2 is an interesting case. Free and Louis battled each other once when they lost. The first time they had battled for 6 rounds before Louis eventually remained victorious, but boosting off the walls and enhancing Metal Dragon Crush for the win. But then we know Free takes him on a rematch and is able to win. So naturally you'd think my answer would be, okay, sure, Free wins in this scenario, obviously, right? Well, remember, Free went on a crazy training run, including lifting a giant boulder to train with and then master Nothing Break. But you could make the argument Free wouldn't have the stamina to go through multiple rounds, given after he defeated Louis, he couldn't finish the match against Vault without the risk of self-imploding. However, remember him and Louis only went 3 rounds. If Free were to fight Louis in that state initially, he's got access to Drain Sprint and Nothing Break. And with Nothing Break, Free has the means to avoid any of Louis' attacks and waste Louis' stamina and counterattack with a stronger move. The only way Louis would be able to overcome that is if he makes Free waste Nothing Break speed first, but Louis doesn't have a special move or the speed to alter trajectory unless he aims for the walls. But even then, Fafnir's wings, boosted by his training, are able to burst without relying on Drain Spin, so I'd give it to Free. Season 3 is weird, and this is where the debate actually gets interesting. Because Louis only showed up in the first arc while Free was around since the end of the second arc was a continued presence throughout the season all the way until the end, there's a little bit of a what-if scenario there. And both of them have some pretty strong showings. Louis was not only able to beat Aiga on his first match, but when Aiga challenged him to a rematch, he was able to defeat Aiga, Ranjiro, and Fubuki, and while it wasn't easy, he had to use Dragon Scream and Bloody Squall in order to defeat them. Now, if I was a closed-minded fool who only sees characters as either champions, top tier, or cannon fodder, I tell you this isn't impressive. But when you remember Ranjiro and Fubuki were both on the level of regional champions and Aiga's been training to beat Vault, Lou's experience was the key part of him winning a 3v1. And he was able to counter Z-Dive when Aiga finally had the experience from winning the Longnius Cup to properly battle him, because his layer's metal is strong enough to endure attacks from above. Then Aiga had to bypass the heavy metal of the layer and use the momentum just to make a ring-out finish. And the only way Aiga beat Bloody Squall is by having Z-Slash target the layer of the attack, since that's the weak spot and dive bomb attacks leave the player's layer exposed. Free on the surface, you could make the argument wins this. He's got 4 special moves. Geist Spin has a wider range than Drain Spin. It has been able to knock Achilles into the air. Geist Counter gives Free more momentum to absorb the opponent's momentum and use that speed for swift counterattacks. Geist Claw is a quick yet powerful move. And Absorb Break's only weakness is that someone like Fi can neutralize it. But then you have to take Fi into consideration, because here's a question no one I have seen ask or answer. Who would have done better against Fi? And you'd think the answer would easily be Free, but no one has considered the fact that Louis actually has some advantages over Free in this regard. For example, the metal layer on Brutal or Bloody Longness is so strong, Louis was able to completely neutralize V-Dive. And we all know one of 5 specialties involves using Dead or Revive Armor Press, or Crush to attack with its armor from above. So Louis has a good chance of surviving that, or at least his Bay does, but also weakening 5, because if he can cancel out the armor like Aiga did, he might be able to push it out of the stadium, completely rendering half of 5 special moves especially useless. Which, yeah, would be pretty impactful because Free essentially can't push the armor out of the way unless he targets it specifically. And the only move that wouldn't come at risk to him being able to push it out would be either Geist Claw or Geist Counter, because Absorb Break needs a time and Geist Spin would only work if you got the armor out first. So Louis could do better against Free than Fi. However, if these two fought each other in Season 3, then I think Free wins. Free has 3 special moves that all can either take advantage of or have metal that would allow him to overpower Dragon Scream, or at least be able to push Longness out of the stadium. And with Absorb Break, Geist Claw, and Geist Counter, he has those options. The only question is, would he be able to survive Bloody Squall? Because that move usually decides the match. It depends on the angle, but if Free uses Geist Spin and a tornado is fully up in the air, he might be able to block it long enough to stage a counterattack. In the comment section below, if you were to have Louis and Free fight the most amount of times in Season 3, who do you think has a higher chance of winning out more, or has more options to beat the other? This would be the part where I would bring up the hypotheticals of Season 4, where they would own Wizard Fafnir and Twilight Longness, because as we saw with Rashad, 2 people can own the same blade. They just tie it to one character, usually for branding purposes. But in this case, I think Louis' raw strength with Zwei could beat Free with Spin, because Wizard Fafnir only has moves to counter both rotations. Wizard Spin could be effective, but Wizard Blow doesn't have the raw power Nothing Break does, while Zweihammer can easily overpower with the 2 metals for the dragons. When we get to Season 5 though, this might be controversial, but I think Free wins out, but it's a little tricky in my process towards thinking of this one. Free and Louis are ranked as the 4th and 5th strongest bladers in the world respectively, so Free has this advantage, but it's more than that. We have seen both of them be able to handle the twins in the beginning easily, and be pushed by them a little bit when it came to training and improving them. Both have lost to Lane, though we've never seen the full confrontation between Free and Cisco versus Shu and Lane. If you want me to do a deep dive into what I think happened, let me know. But Louis and Drum have wins over Vault and Rentaro, and Aiga and Ranjiro. So why would I still place Free above Louis in this case? Well, remember, Free and Cisco only lost against those two because they didn't figure out how to use the Stormplate, and Ranjiro figured it out at the last minute, and Voltaro aimed for an overfinish. In a pure head-to-head clash, we saw what happened. Louis and Drum tried to isolate Free and Cisco Cisco was able to bait Drum into shifting Dragging out of the way for him to let Free break Drum's chances of winning the battle into nothing. Then, Louis was able to clash with Free pretty equally, but Free had locked Louis in place for Cisco to knock them both out of the stadium so they could win. Now, this is impressive because, as a reminder, Louis and Drum are ranked 5th and 6th before Lane stepped into the picture. Meanwhile, Cisco was ranked 11th, and yet Free was able to maximize his potential by taking down 2 opponents that are much stronger than him if they were ever to fight 1v1. There's also the fact that if Free and Louis were to fight 1v1, Free has 2 special moves to Louis' 1. And it's a similar problem to Season 2 because Mirage Claw actually could fight back against Raging Upper, but unless Louis decides to use Raging Upper against the wall to give himself a speed boost, he has no counters for Nothing Break. So Free wins here. Moving on to Season 6, we have a little bit of a problem because they kind of don't do all that, but in this case, Louis breaks Free. Kick counter and vanish counter are great at counter attacks as long as they're not dealing with a flying attack from above. But Free's gimmicks only allow him to use a kick driver. A spring-loaded disc allows it to drift, but Free doesn't have a super powerful move that's not a slow motion burst to rely upon for a simple but effective attack. Meanwhile, Louis does. Guilty upper versus kick counter is a bit of a debate, but Louis has Guilty Smash, and there's nothing Free can do about that. The tornado from the downward force is not something Fafnir can deal with, and potentially could overpower a kick counter if it targets the center instead of causing it to wobble. And even Vanish counter could struggle to push back against Guilty Smash. So in most scenarios, Louis definitely defeats Free in Season 6. So, what's the points? This doesn't matter. Ultimately, the writers decide who wins, and you'd have to be intentionally trying to rage bait if you consider Louis or Free weak one bit. Just because they eventually take on people who can beat them doesn't diminish their threat level whatsoever. You can make an argument that either one of them wins more often than not, and someone will still be right in the end, but just be happy we had the characters in the first place. They gave us hype, humor, heartwarming moments, nightmare fuel, and spun their way into our consciousness. That's it for me though. Tell me your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for watching as always. Like, comment, and subscribe as usual, because apparently telling people to like, comment, and subscribe actually works. And BIP of Bizarre Interest Productions, signing off.